While others can find forests unsettling in the dark, I've always found that there is something uniquely tranquil about walking through a forest at night. There would be no one but me, and the sound of the wind through the trees, the rustling of small animals through the leaf litter, and the sound of the forest floor crunching beneath my boots. I had decided to take a walk through the woods of my hometown. I always did this when life got too much, and today, I needed to clear my head. "Ah, peace and quiet," I said to myself as I began the hour or so walk I had taken countless times before. The walk ended at a beautiful lake that I used to play around in when I was a child. That's where I had to be, where I needed to be. The lake always had a way of making me feel great nostalgia for a past life I wished I could go back to, a life I would never forget. The moonlight lit most of my trail, and for a while I had no need for my torch. The forest made its familiar sounds. What I wasn't expecting was a low grumble of thunder in the distance. Oh no, please don't rain. I wasn't dressed properly for a storm, but nothing was going to stop me from my destination. I continued. I knew the woods like the back of my hand. Every tree, every rock was like a navigation tool for me. The lake wasn't far, maybe half an hour or so away, and that's when I heard something that caught me off guard. A laugh. I'm sure it was. It was faint and clearly off in the distance. It was a woman's laugh, not a maniacal laugh, but a playful giggle. This was enough to make me feel somewhat uneasy. However, I told myself that it must have just been a sound of the forest or some sort of animal, and I continued on. I made it to the lake and found a place to sit. The moonlight bounced off the water, illuminating the whole lake. I grabbed a stick and moved it through the lake, listening to the sound of the water gently rippling. I sat there for a long time and had completely forgotten about the giggle I heard earlier. I didn't want to leave, but the hour was growing late, and I thought it was about time I get back, so I stood myself up and then I gasped. Across the lake there was a woman. She caught me by surprise. Why was she out here this late? I noticed that, strangely, she was naked. She wasn't horrifying but beautiful. However, it was a cold night, so my immediate thought was that she was in danger. "Hello, are you all right?" She didn't respond, just stood there looking at me and smiling. There was a low rumble of thunder again, and the approaching clouds started to cover the moon. I couldn't see her anymore. All I heard was a quiet giggle echo across the lake. All the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't know why. I wanted to go around the lake and try to help her, but something was telling me that I needed to leave. Now. I turned around and started to go back the way I came. But every step I took, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I felt eyes on me like daggers on the back of my head. I didn't turn around. I was scared. Was it her? What did she want? I didn't turn around. I carried on walking until I heard a whisper from behind me. "Turn around." I jumped out of my skin and quickly turned around to find her behind me, standing with her arms straight down by her side, like a soldier standing at attention. I turned on my torch and pointed it at her. There was something not right. Her teeth were black, and her eyes, they had no iris, just two white eyes with a pair of tiny pupils. Her grin stretched across her face, and as she smiled, black liquid seeped from the corner of her mouth. "Don't forget," she said, followed by yet another playful giggle. With this, she slinked back slowly into the forest and disappeared behind a tree. I didn't follow. I turned around and walked as quickly as I could. I knew that if I ran, I would lose my way, and it was beginning to rain. It was so dark now that all I could see was what my torch was illuminating. I finally came to a clearing where the path diverged into two. I recognized the tree that stood between the two paths. I had seen it countless times before. No, is it left or right? Shit. How could I not remember? I've walked this trail 100 times. It was like muscle memory to me. Okay, think. It's left. It's gotta be left. I walked quickly down the trail to the left, and almost as soon as I did, I heard that fucking laughter again. But this time it was loud and hysterical. I shone my torch through the trees. The laughter sounded like it was coming from all around me until it stopped abruptly. I turned my attention back to the path, and there she stood. She wasn't smiling anymore, just staring at me. Her appearance seemed to have changed once again. Her arms had become unnaturally long, almost touching the floor, and her skin was deathly pale and gray. She took one step forward towards me, and I took one step back. She whispered, "Don't forget." The smile reappeared on her face, and the black liquid poured out of her mouth again, this time like a river of blood flowing down her neck and chest. I was frozen in fear, watching her as she bent down onto all fours and crept slowly around me, disappearing once again. It took me a while to snap back into reality. I scanned the forest in front of me. I couldn't remember anything. The path ahead, the trees, everything looked alien to me. All I could do was follow the path ahead of me and hope to God that it leads me out of the woods. The forest was quiet now. The rain had stopped. No wind, no rustling of leaf litter, no crickets, no birds. Nothing. I tried to remember how long I had been on this path, but I seemingly had no memory of anything besides the woman. I didn't even remember how I got to the forest or why. I stopped in the middle of the path, desperately looking around for anything that would jog my memory. All the while, the deafening silence continued. Not a damn thing could remind me where I was or how to escape. As my eyes glanced around, they fixed on something irregular. There seemed to be something carved on a tree. I slowly walked forward and realized they were words. When I got close enough, I could read those words. "Don't look at it, don't listen to it." My torch started to flicker. No, please no." I hit it against my palm, until mercifully it sprung back into life, and then... The forest wasn't quiet anymore. I could hear breathing, heavy, labored breathing, almost like someone having an asthma attack. I shone my torch toward the noise and saw a hand clutching. Getting laid is overrated anyways. My first time was the quintessential fantasy, an older, quirky party girl who would show me the ropes. It was awkward and fumbling, and we kept clacking our teeth together. You know what I got out of it? HPV. My friend Eduardo said with a rousing laugh that drew the attention of everyone at the cafe. I didn't find it amusing. His attempts to comfort me only made me feel worse. At least he had a story he could laugh at. Look, moping around isn't getting you anywhere. You're 19. No one thinks it's weird. All that shit you see on TV is fiction. Plus, everyone gets laid at this sleazy campus. Give it time and stop being weird. Anyways, bro, gotta get ready for Reese's thing. You should come and unwind a bit. With a half-hearted sure, I sealed my fate. I'd find her at that party, or more aptly, she'd find me. Dozing off at a pool table, half drunk with a cheap light beer in my hand, the girl of my dreams tapped me on my shoulder. "I've never seen you around," she said, smirking and with eyes crinkled. "Yeah, first time I've shown up to one of these." "Aubrey. Luis. I have a confession to make. I don't know these people all that well. I just wander in occasionally when I see the lights and music. Free booze, you know?" I laughed at her boldness, eased by the mild buzz that had come over me, and we talked for the next hour. She must have had an instinct within her to recognize loneliness from body language alone. That must have been what drew her to me. There was a hunger in her glare. "Want to get out of here and head back to my place?" she asked. My ears burned and my heart skipped a beat. I had resisted the urge to sound too eager. I tried playing it off and said, I had nothing better to do, so why not? A hand on my shoulder and that ravenous look once again disarmed and drew me close. Black cherry-stained lips parted to reveal the unnaturally white childlike teeth within. They were saliva-slicked, and she was salivating. My bluff had been called, and I was too stupid to realize it. "Good," was all she said before motioning with her head towards the door. It wasn't a short walk, didn't drag on either, just long enough to fill the silence with idle talk of our past and dreams. She had started off as a psych major but changed her mind halfway through. "Social work? That's pretty noble," I said. "I wouldn't say noble. Plenty of people are suffering or lacking any lifelines or nets. I'd say it's the bare minimum of what it takes to be a half-decent person." Can't argue against that. "So, do you think I'm a good person?" she asked, swiveling her head toward me, locking eyes with me. so close her breath warmed the skin of my clavicle. Her eyes were the color of honey, and the dark makeup that lined them made her look mystical. Her hair was neck-length and two-toned. Half was bright yellow, and the other half raven black and glossy. Her proximity, the rising pace of her breath, the wide-eyed look of madness creeping through. None of it dissuaded me. The rush of blood and endorphins created a haze that blinded me to everything but an itch that had never been scratched. "Yeah, I do." "Good," she said and pointed to her flat. We stepped inside a Spartan living room. That surprised me. I'd thought that someone like her would have a much more decorated dwelling. I had a cup of tea, and I stumbled through a nerve-fueled casual talk before Aubrey asked me if I wanted to head upstairs. The time for chit-chat was over. I strode towards her and took her hand as she led me to her room. Once again eerily barren except for a bed and a nightstand, but I quickly overlooked it as Naomi unwrapped herself from her coat. Her shirt had a deep V-shaped neckline that caused something deep within the pit of my stomach to stir. "Nervous? Don't be. I'll show you the ropes," she said. She pirouetted around behind me, skillfully sliding me out of my coat, and her hand was upon my bare flesh. My skin tickled, and goosebumps blossomed at the delicate dance her fingers performed as she traced them up the nape of my neck. I closed my eyes, threw my head back, and exhaled as I let myself sink into her touch. Eduardo had been right. It was awkward and stumbling the first time. There was some vague sense of guilt, but not quite that lingered in the minutes after it was over. I didn't feel complete like I thought I would. Didn't feel different. "Hey, now that you've tried the vanilla stuff, want to get a little experimental?" she asked. I felt something like excitement. Not entirely sure, but I nodded eagerly at a second chance. "Follow me," she said, and we stood in unison. As she led me into an adjacent room, I couldn't help but notice her excited breathing. It tugged at some rising emotion once more, and as we came to a stop at the center of the empty room, she threw herself over me in an abrupt embrace. A breath hissed out of me, and I closed my eyes and reciprocated. The peace shattered as my eyes fluttered open, and another breath was forced out of me so fast I couldn't even scream. Fire was in my veins, boiling my blood and hammering into every nerve ending until I crumpled into myself and fell to the ground. Aubrey was dragging me toward her closet, and I tried to stand up and fight back, but once again she pressed something against me that made my world go white, and every part of me lock up in agony. When she finally pulled her taser away, I saw that she had positioned me directly in front of her closet. "I have a confession to make. I lied to you. I'm not interested in you romantically or sexually. You don't interest me at all. And even if I was, I'm already taken. Speaking of which, that's why you're here," she said, flinging the closet door open. Within was a corpse, bone white, and had the top half of his head cleaved off so that his bisected brain and skull were fully displayed. What used to be brain matter, now a sickly greenish-blue hue that made my stomach lurch. He wore a ceremonial robe, maroon and gold inlaid with complex geometric sigils. On his skin were ink strips, running along the center of his arms, to his palms, from his chest, up his neck and resting on his chin. I could see him as nothing more than a corpse, but something within my mind couldn't recognize him as dead, as if my psyche rejected that this thing could die. A scream tried to worm its way from the pit of my stomach into the open air, but the chokehold of resignation gave voice to only a meek whimper. "Don't be afraid." Story 2. It all started after moving into my new house. Yeah, that's pretty cliche. Believe me, I know, but it's what happened. I never experienced anything supernatural before, and though interested, I never really expected anything to happen to me. I was able to rent the house for pretty cheap. I didn't think anything of it because it was old and not in the best of neighborhoods, so I guessed I just got a good deal. After moving everything in, things were fine for a while. I don't remember exactly when it started because it seemed so minor at the time. I'd leave a light on in the kitchen or the bathroom and come back to find it off. Honestly, I thought I was just forgetting that I turned them off already when I came back. After a while, I began to wonder and started leaving a couple lights on purpose. Sometimes, nothing would happen. Sometimes, I'd come back to find the lights turned off. By now, I figured out that something was off. I wasn't really scared, but just confused. I thought maybe something was wrong with the electronics. I started leaving lights on a bit more often because I thought I might be able to get some sign of why they would randomly shut off. That's when it started to take another turn. The first real time I remember something crazy happening was when I left the kitchen and living room light on while I was asleep. I woke up to a deep, rumbling growl coming from the kitchen. Now from the bedroom, you can see down the hall to the living room, and that room is connected to the kitchen. I remember waking up and thinking that there was an animal or something in my house. I looked down the hall toward the living room to see the light darken. Somebody had flicked off the light from the kitchen. Another low growl came, this time from the living room, and I nearly screamed as I saw something bolt across the length of the hall opening, and then the living room light went out. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, though. It just seemed like a black shadow or something. It didn't really matter. I was scared shitless. I bolted from my bed then and threw on the bedroom light, expecting something to be in this room and getting ready to come after me. Nothing. There wasn't anything in the room. I let out a low breath, and then I slowly moved down the hall into the living room. Once I got to the end, I practically ran to throw on the light switch there. Again, nothing. Kitchen next, and once again, nothing. I was starting to think I dreamed all of it before I went to turn off the kitchen light and stopped. Now, I was a grown man, but here I was terrified to turn off that switch. And I'll admit it, I slept with all the lights on that night. That was a mistake. When I woke up the next morning, all the lights were off once again. I went to push myself out of bed and winced as my body felt sore. I pulled the sheets off to see long red marks running down along my legs and arms. It looked like something scratched me in the night. That terrified the hell out of me, but not nearly so much as what I saw around the house. Every light I left on was smashed. Every light bulb that was on last night was broken. Every lamp knocked over and smashed in. My breath caught in my throat as I looked around. Something was fucked up as hell here, and something tried to, do something to me. I called in for work that day and went to immediately replace all the lights. I didn't know what to do then. I thought about leaving, and I know this probably sounds stupid, but this was my home. It was my first time away from my family, and this was my home. I couldn't give it up. So, I stayed, even as it got worse. Even though I was beginning to become terrified of the dark, I couldn't really sleep with the light on me at night in the bedroom. I'd leave other lights on though, like in the hall or the living room, giving myself enough to see pretty well in my darker room. And, almost every night, I'd wake up in the middle of the night to hear something growling and prowling around the living room, and then the lights would shut off. I didn't want to go look. I was terrified at the thought of being in the same room with whatever was in there. So I curled up in bed and prayed it never came in. One night, after this went on for a while, I had it. I bought a gun and turned on every light in the house. Then I sat down in the middle of the living room with my gun in my lap and a baseball bat sitting next to me. I waited. There was nothing at first for a long time. At around 2 a.m, I began to hear it. Oddly, it was behind me. I turned and peeked toward the hall to my bedroom and could hear that familiar growl. I swallowed and held my gun in one hand and the bat in the other, and slowly began to step around to get a better view of bedroom from the living room. As I began to get a view of my bed, I heard a loud thump, followed by an inhuman roar. I, being the brave man I was, jumped back and away from the hallway. I wanted to end this all, but dear God, I didn't want to deal with that thing. I could hear tearing and smashing, and I don't know how I caught it, but I did manage to hear an audible click, and then nothing. Slowly, I went back to peek down the hall, and the light was off once again. A deep breath, and I ventured forth, my weapons ready. When I came to my bedroom and flicked the light back on, I gasped. My bed was ravaged, torn completely apart. It was like some animal had jumped into it and just ripped it to shreds. I stepped forward to look at what was left of my bed, and just stood in shock for who knows when. It wasn't until I heard the sound of a familiar growl that I turned around. Standing near my door, right at the light switch, was when I finally saw it. It was a man, a white and rotting man with a mangled body that looked like he had once been a dog's chew toy staring at me. I was too in shock to even raise my weapons. He stared at me for just a moment and then flicked off the light. I screamed. I'm not even ashamed to admit it. I screamed and bolted. I didn't care if that was where that man had been standing. I ran right past where I had seen him, swinging my bat like a madman. I nearly put a hole in the hallway as I ran through into the safe light of the hall. I turned to look back then, just in time to see him once again near the hall's light switch. He turned that one off too. By then, I didn't want to fight. I wanted to be safe. I burst past the living room and into the brightness of my kitchen. I heard the sound of growling and scratching nearly all around me then, and I knew he was coming back. I looked back to once again see that mangled and rotten corpse of a man turn off another light with a broken finger and plunge me into terrifying darkness. I broke for the living room. This was going to be my final stand. I'd have to fight here. I drew close to the standing lamp that was my last line of defense. It hated the dark, so I'd stay right here, next to this comforting standing lamp. I waited for it to turn off, but it never did. I looked around and quiet. Nothing but quiet. I turned then to look at that saving grace of a lamp that refused to yield. I started to find myself laughing. A crazy but alive laugh, and I thought I'd finally be okay. I stepped closer and I swear I almost hugged that lamp, until I saw it. I heard the growl first coming not from behind me but in front, from that lamp. My eyes widened and I stared as the light from that lamp intensified. I stumbled back and I don't know what happened, but I think I tripped on something. I just know I found myself flat on my back staring up at that bright, intense light. It wasn't comforting any longer, just hot and heavy and bright. I thought it was going to burn me away. And then it came. I don't have words to describe what poured from that lamp's light. It was hideous, twisted, and filled with rage. I know I'll never forget those eyes, though. Bright, hot, and white. Two glowing circles of pure malice. It hated me. It hated everything about me. And not just me. It hated all of us. Every human being. But it was stuck here. And it would lash out at what it could. Me. I don't know how I knew this, but I just knew. I lunged for me and I prepared myself for a painful death. Click. The light went out. Once again came darkness. Sweet, quiet, relaxing darkness. I stayed on the ground for a long moment, letting my eyes adjust as I kept my gaze fixated on where my standing lamp was. As the seconds passed, I could start to make him out. That mangled man standing by the lamp, one torn hand upon the switch as he looked down at me. I understood then. I understood what it all meant. Everything that happened. The man pulled his hand away from it and then pointed a mangled finger toward it before, very clearly, shaking his head from side to side. All I could find myself doing was nodding. He wasn't the one trying to harm me. All this time, all those instances, he was trying to protect me. That creature could only come in the light. And this mangled man had been trying to keep me safe. He didn't want someone else to repeat his mistakes. I moved out the very next day and never looked back. Whatever it was confined to that house, and, so far, nothing has come at me from another light source. However, that thing will always stick with me in my mind. Every night in my new apartment, I made a habit of wandering around the house, making sure every light is off, every curtain is closed, and made sure to plunge myself in quiet, comforting, and safe pitch darkness.